When I was very young, my parents had purchased a large parcel of land out in a heavily wooded rural area, and, as I grew up, they had transformed it little by little into a quiet sanctuary that we just called the camp. A barely visible dirt road, hardly wide enough for a small SUV, led from the main stretch of isolated blacktop deep into the woods, where it wound around to a rustic 3-bedroom cabin with a wraparound wooden porch surrounded by dozens of acres of lush green woods on all sides. There was a large pond for fishing, plenty of woods for hunting and exploring, and a huge clearing near the front of the cabin with picnic tables for family gatherings and bonfires. Although there was running water and electricity at the camp, most notably, there were no TVs, no internet, and no cell phone service. My parents believed it would foster a closer family relationship, and they were right. In fact, some of my happiest memories as a kid were at the camp. However, those happy memories would all fade the year I turned 18, and to this day, I've never gone back. I had just graduated from high school, and my parents had offered me the use of the camp for the weekend while they were out of town. They were kind of strict, so I wasn't allowed to bring any other friends with me, but I could still do some fishing, cook over an open fire, hike in the woods, and maybe finally read some of that sci-fi novel I had been wanting to get into, so of course I gratefully accepted. It was nearing dusk as I pulled my small car onto the dirt road leading deep into the woods and toward the camp. After a few minutes at a slow speed, the cabin came into view, and I pulled my trusty old car up close to the steps leading up to the porch and turned off the engine. I grabbed my duffel bag on the seat next to me and made my way to the heavy front door, which I unlocked with the keys my parents had loaned me. Having been over a month since we last visited, it was very warm and more than a little musty inside the cabin. I reached for the light switch near the door and flipped it. Nothing. Oh, that's right, I thought. Dad keeps the breaker off when we're not here. I sat my duffel bag down and jogged through the cabin to the back door. That would open onto the back porch and lead me to the utility pole slightly beyond that. Using the keys once more, I unlocked the padlock on the breaker box, opened it on its slightly rusty hinge, and pushed hard on the large breaker bar inside the box. A loud snap sounded as the cabin came to life. Light flooded my eyes, the well water pump a few yards away buzzed to life, the central air conditioner unit nearby clicked on and began to run, eager to cool down the overly warm cabin. Closing the back door behind me, I made my way back to the front door to retrieve the heavy ice chest full of food and drinks from my car that I'd packed for the weekend. As I closed the back door of my little 4-door sedan, I noticed a long scratch that hadn't been there before. It appeared to go straight through the clear coat and paint and deep into the metal. "Oh, crap," I said out loud. I thought I must have brushed against a tree limb or something sticking out as I came up the road, although I don't remember that happening. Oh well, I thought, one more scratch on my already well-bruised vehicle wouldn't make much difference. No use in letting it sour my weekend. After unloading, I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a cold can of soda from the fridge, shuffled into the living room, and flopped down into a well-worn but very comfortable armchair near an antique-looking floor lamp. Now seemed like a great time to read some of my new sci-fi book while the cabin was gradually cooling down thanks to the central air conditioning, whose soft hiss could be heard gently flowing from the floor registers. I opened the novel, took a sip from the aluminum can, and briefly looked around the room. My image reflected back at me from every angle, thanks to the generous and numerous windows that my parents had built into the cabin so that we could fully enjoy the beauty of the nature around it. It spooked me a little at night for some reason, but it always had. I returned to my book and was soon engrossed in a tale about a place far, far away from the camp. I don't know how many hours had gone by when I realized that something no longer sounded right. The air conditioner had turned off a while ago, leaving the cabin dry and cool, so it must have been something else. I picked up my head and strained to hear. Nothing. That's what I heard. Nothing. Before, the air had been filled with the sounds of the woods at night. Crickets, cicadas, owls, frogs, and now nothing. It was as if someone had suddenly turned off the soundtrack of the woods. It was eerie. Putting down my book, I stood up, intrigued. I've never heard this happen before. I moved toward the kitchen where its semicircular design and numerous windows allowed me to see quite a bit of the area surrounding the cabin. A large branch in a tree suddenly snapped and came falling to the ground somewhere in the woods in front of me. I could see the rustling of the trees around it directly ahead through the windows. I nearly jumped out of my skin. And just like that, the night sounds were back. Weird, I said out loud. I stared out the windows for a minute more until my heart calmed down a bit. And with that, I decided it was time for a shower and bed. I made my way toward the single bathroom at the back of the cabin, flicking off light switches as I went, leaving pitch black, inky darkness in my wake. My wristwatch said 3 a.m. as I looked at it blearily in the dark master bedroom. I thought I had felt vibrations from the floor, like something heavy had been treading across the porch. Sitting up in bed, I listened, but heard and felt nothing more. It must have been in my dream, or maybe it had just been the sound of the air conditioner kicking on again. I could feel the cool air rushing out of the floor registers toward my face. My throat felt dry and in need of something cold to drink. I threw back the sheets and got up from the bed, making my way in the dark to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator door and felt momentarily blinded by the light inside. I grabbed a soda and turned away from the bright light of the fridge, letting the door close on its own behind me. As I did, the shrinking sliver of light from the refrigerator shone briefly on something on one of the windows across from it. Cracking open the can of soda as I padded my way to the window, one of 3 in the kitchen that faced the front of the cabin, I could just barely make out the outline of my car sitting close to the porch where I had left it when I arrived. I bent down to look closer at the spot I thought I had seen something on the window a moment ago. There was definitely something there, like maybe a crack or something, but it was too dark to tell. I stood up and felt for the panel of light switches nearby. I flicked up the one closest to the right, and almost instantly, warm, dim light bathed the porch outside. My breath caught in my throat. What I had at first thought was a crack was something else entirely. It looked like a deep, deep etching from something extremely thick and sharp, wider than the blade of a knife. The cut and the pain looked as though whatever had caused this had been dragged deliberately and thoroughly across this portion of the window. If my parents hadn't insisted on the extra expense of polycarbonate, this window would have been shattered to pieces by this scratch. This definitely hadn't been here earlier. That, I was sure of it. Something else I was sure of, with chills creeping up my spine, is that someone, or something, had deliberately caused that scratch while I had been here tonight. And that deep scratch looked an awful lot like the one I saw in the door of my car earlier. Had this been the horn of some type of animal? I walked to the front door and unlocked it, stepping out into the warm night and onto the porch. All seemed still and normal. The night creatures continued their weariless song unabated as I examined the scratch from the outside now. It definitely was cut with something sharp and wide, not a precision instrument by any means, but something a bit jagged based on the impressions left in the glass. Maybe it was just a horny animal bucking up against a solid object through testosterone and adrenaline. I tried to see into the large clearing in front of me, but the porch lights were too dim to penetrate the blackness of this moonless early morning. I needed to turn on the floodlights to see any further. Walking back into the dark kitchen, leaving the front door momentarily open, I flicked the switch for the floodlights and, in seconds, an electric buzzing sound filled the air as the large lights came to life and spilled bright, intense beams across the clearing, reaching almost all the way to the pond in the distance. I stood, looking out of the scratched window, and scanned the entire yard. Nothing was out of place. Nothing seemed wrong. No extra vehicles hiding in the bushes. No large animals scampering about. Whatever it was, well, I guess it must be gone now. Continuing to watch the front of the cabin through the window, I switched off the floodlights and emptied the rest of my soda. I turned toward the kitchen sink behind me to place the empty aluminum can on the counter. I let out a scream of shock and terror. In the window behind the sink stood a hideous, tall, extremely hairy creature with glowing red eyes looking back at me. "Holy shit!" I screamed. The creature raised its overly long, furry arms into the air and flashed its claws, almost human-like in their design, except that one digit on each claw was grotesquely thick and long, with a long, jagged, deadly-looking nail on the end. That had been what scratched the window. The creature leaned its head back and let out a blood-curdling shriek that was instantly recognizable as the sound of an angry, hungry animal. I could feel the vibrations of its loud, deep cry all the way into my bones. My blood went cold. The creature unexpectedly swung at the window, letting its single long talon thud against the pane as heavy as a baseball bat. A long, deep scratch immediately appeared. Another shriek blasted out from the hideous thing that was separated from me by only a pane of polycarbonate. This time, it stared into my eyes, its rage seeming to make its glowing eyes even more luminous and hateful. I saw that its thick, brownish-black hair was matted with dirt all over its body, and parts of leaves and sticks stuck into its fur, as did what appeared to be entrails of animals previously eaten. It must have been nearly 8 feet tall, as the top of its grotesque, misshapen head was hidden above the top of the window pane. Its mouth was an impossibly long, gaping maw, full of discolored, jagged protrusions. The creature swung at the window again, and I let out another involuntary scream. Its red eyes darted from me to something off to my left, and, with surprising dexterity and quickness, it began to jog away from the window around the porch to my right. I looked over my shoulder. Fuck! I had left the front door wide open, its thick security meaningless. I ran as fast as I could toward the door. I could feel the creature's heavy footfalls reverberating through the cabin as I tried to reach the open doorway before it did. An impossibly large shadow fell across the entrance to the door just as I reached it. I grabbed the door and slammed its heavy, thick slab toward the frame. I felt the beginning of resistance as the creature reached the door and tried to push back. But the door slammed with a satisfying bang anyhow, and I quickly turned the deadbolts into the locked position. The creature shrieked out again in anger and defeat, and immediately began pounding on the door. The entire frame shook with each fall of the creature's fists, and I worried that the door, as strong and solid as it was, might not hold. Shit! I needed to get a shotgun from the hunting closet in the master bedroom. Something beefy with a lot of kick, something to... The pounding suddenly stopped. Heavy footsteps seemed to recede from the door. I ran to the nearest window, half expecting the creature to be looking directly at me, its sharp yellow and green mottled teeth wide in a frozen snarl of hatred. But nothing was there. Nothing was on the porch. What the I strained to look out beyond the porch into the darkened yard beyond. I saw nothing at first, but then, just barely, I noticed the creature's massive outline in the darkness, its fur seeming to blend seamlessly into the deep woods around it. It had left the porch and was walking quickly around the other side of the cabin now, toward the back door. Fuck! The back door was closed and locked, but it was obvious that this thing was not giving up. In full flight or fight mode, I ran as fast as I could through the cabin, my heart trying to pound out of my chest as I raced to the back door. The door was hit so hard that I could visibly see where the wall shook as I approached it. The creature screamed again, its hungry and hateful voice just inches from my face, separated only by a single, thick piece of solid wood. I shuddered involuntarily. Running into the master bedroom, I reached the hunting closet and threw it open, intending to grab a 12-gauge from the large metal safe inside. Locked. Shit. I hadn't asked my parents for the key to the cabinet because I didn't intend on going hunting this weekend. The creature screamed again and began pacing on the deck of the porch, its heavy footfalls vibrating through the floor to my own bare feet. I could make a run for it. My car is right off the front porch. The curtains are closed in the master bedroom. Maybe the creature wouldn't see me long enough for me to get inside and turn the engine over. It was worth a try. I ran from the master bedroom toward the front of the cabin. I could feel the creature's footfalls still, but I hoped it was still just pacing back and forth. It was hard to tell what it was doing without any visual cues. Reaching the living room, I saw my keys sitting on the kitchen counter. Another cracking sound came from behind me, but it seemed dull, like the thing was pounding on something in the backyard. Sweeping them into my hand, I reached the front door and unlocked it, throwing it open as I ran onto the porch and down the front steps. I opened the door to my car and slid behind the wheel, slamming the door closed behind me. Another dull, cracking sound, a flash of light, and then everything went pitch black. The creature must have been beating on the breaker pole and had managed to crack it, taking my only source of electricity with it. I jammed my keys into the ignition, turning the key as hard as I could, listening to my engine sputter reliably to life. The headlights flickered on. The monster was directly in front of my car, maybe 50 yards away, and running fast toward me. For as large as it was surprisingly agile. I could hear its horrible, hateful shriek over the sound of my engine as it approached. I jammed the shift lever into drive and slammed down on the accelerator, turning my wheel hard to the left. My back tire spun momentarily before catching, and the car lunged forward as if it were actually aware of the danger befalling it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the creature jump into the air as if it weighed almost nothing. Another shriek bellowed from the creature as it came down from the air and pounced on the trunk of my car as I tried to escape. I was suddenly thrown forward, my head hitting the steering wheel. I pressed harder on the accelerator, but the creature had my car pinned, the front half of my vehicle lifted, tires spinning uselessly inches above the ground. I could feel a warm trickle from my forehead beginning to flow as the monster jumped up and down on the back of my car. The vehicle bucked violently like an impromptu seesaw. I had to lock my arms on the steering wheel to keep from being thrown around again. My foot lost its hold on the accelerator. My poor car couldn't take the abuse. Within seconds, the engine suddenly went silent. The creature released my vehicle and it rocked back onto the ground violently, extinguishing my headlamps from the force. Suddenly, everything was very quiet. Much too quiet. The sounds of the night had fallen away with everything else, and were it not for the dim light of my wristwatch and my own ragged breath, I would have feared I had gone both blind and deaf. I turned the key in the ignition, hoping for a miracle. Nothing, not even a click. All of my senses on high alert, I looked around but could barely see past the dashboard in front of me. The sounds of the night returned to me like a volume dial being turned gently. "Where did you go?" I wondered out loud, wiping the trickle of red from my forehead with the back of my hand. It was already drying up, thankfully. I sat still for what felt like hours, just listening for any clue as to where the creature went. Looking at my watch, barely 30 minutes had gone by since I had first woken up in bed thinking something was wrong. Somehow, I felt that if I could just make it through the night, I could escape this place and whatever creature had seemingly escaped from hell to terrorize me. My best chance was inside the cabin, where stronger walls and many more hiding spaces existed. The only problem with that is that the cabin was probably 50 yards or more away at this point, and I would have to cover that completely unarmed, unable to see beyond the tip of my nose. I gathered up my courage, determined to make a run for it to the cabin door that I had left standing open when I bolted out of there. Not knowing whether I would make it, instantly be attacked and slashed to ribbons, or find the creature already waiting for me in the cabin, I was letting fear freeze me. I had to push through it. I had to take a chance. If I stayed in this flimsy vehicle, the monster would certainly kill me if it returned. I carefully opened the door of my car, trying to make as little noise as possible. Thankfully, it swung open on its hinges without much fuss. I looked out of the door, unable to see very far, but trusting that the night sounds around me were audible proof of the creature's missing presence. I carefully swung my legs over and out of the vehicle, easing myself into the silky darkness. Slowly, cautiously, I began walking toward the cabin shape in the distance. As the darkened porch came clearly into view, I felt a bit of relief, but it was short-lived. Like a switch, the sound of the night extinguished suddenly. My heart began to thump in my chest. I ran as fast as I could toward the porch, tripping on the steps as I went toward the front door. Stumbling into the front entrance, I grabbed the door and slammed it shut, the sound seeming to echo all around me. I jumped in shock as something beat forcefully against the door. The creature must have been right behind me. It let out another ferocious shriek full of rage and hatred and began banging on the door non-stop. I ran out of the living room and down the hallway, searching for a hiding place in case the monster made it inside this time. I stopped at the middle bedroom and ran inside toward the closet along the right-hand wall. I jerked open the door and closed myself inside, trying not to think of the small, cramped, lightless space as a coffin. As the beating continued on the front door, muffled now behind another door, I fumbled in the dark, tripping over boxes and old clothes, games and toys in the closet, trying to get as far into the corner as I could. I shrank down behind the items in the closet and sat with my knees to my chest, shivering even though the cabin had become warm again. The banging continued on and on, accompanied by the occasional angry shriek. Once in a while, I could hear it trying to scratch its way through a window, but thankfully, they seemed to hold their own. Eventually, at some point near 5 o'clock in the morning, according to my watch, everything went silent. I knew it was still out there, though, waiting, listening, hiding, just like me. At some point, weariness overtook me, and I must have nodded off. When I awoke, night sounds had been replaced with those of day, and sunlight could be seen even from my vantage point in the closet. Carefully, I arose and made my way out into the bedroom, then into the living room. The windows on every side of the cabin looked as though they were fogged over, but on closer inspection, it was just hundreds and hundreds of angry, clawing scratches. The front door had held, but barely. The frame had started to pull away from the door. If the creature had just been a little more persistent, well, I don't want to think about that. I left the cabin, worn and weary, and walked in the bright, hot sunlight all the way down the dirt road to the main blacktop, and, as luck would have it, managed to flag down an old man in an old truck with an old dog beside him. He drove me to his home where his wife fussed over me while I called my parents out of town to come and get me. I'm not sure if anyone believed my story, at least not entirely. Everyone seemed to have their own opinion as to what really happened, and the questions seemed unending and insulting. Why did it choose me as its prey? Why did it give up at some point? Was I sure it wasn't just a black bear? Did my friends and I really just have a party and it got out of hand? I don't care, though. I know what happened, and I know what I saw, and I never, ever went back to the camp again.